By noon, the company was celebrating an 18 notice valuation jump credited to the CFO. By evening, the number began to unravel, one silent upload at a time, as files no one expected quietly rewrote the story behind the applause. Samantha noticed the applause before she saw the slide. It rolled through the open office like a warm, practiced wave, too synchronized to be spontaneous, too polished to be honest. Someone had triggered it. She paused near the glass corridor, fingers still resting on the edge of her laptop, and let her eyes adjust to the projection on the far wall. Plus 18 narcs valuation impact. Her breath didn't catch. It thinned. The number sat there, glowing in confident blue, framed by clean typography and quiet arrogance. Below it, in smaller text, a line she knew too well, because she had written it herself 3 months ago, in a document that had never left her controlled folders. Proprietary optimization model, increasing margin predictability across verticals. But the name beneath it wasn't hers. It was his. A faint smile appeared on the screen beside the text, polished, composed, unmistakably belonging to the CFO. The room leaned toward him, attention tilting like flowers toward light. Authority always had gravity here, and he wore it easily, as if it had always belonged to him. Samantha didn't move. For a moment, the office dissolved into fragments, keyboard clicks, the hum of climate control, a faint scent of coffee drifting from somewhere behind her. All of it continued, indifferent, while something quieter shifted inside her. Not shock, not yet, recognition. She stepped forward just enough to hear his voice more clearly. What truly differentiates us, he was saying, measured and calm, is our internal capability to anticipate margin fluctuations before they surface in reporting cycles. A pause, a nod. Someone typed faster. Samantha's gaze drifted to the edge of the slide. There it was, the structure, the phrasing, even the sequence of logic. He hadn't just taken the outcome. He had taken the thinking, and he was presenting it as if it had always been his. A colleague brushed past her, murmuring something about finally seeing the numbers land. Samantha gave a small, automatic nod. Her body remembered how to perform normality even when her mind refused, because something didn't align. Not yet. She turned slightly, opening her laptop without sitting down. The screen flickered to life, familiar and neutral. Her folders were where they should be. Her access was intact. No obvious signs, no forced changes. That was almost worse. Careful work leaves fewer fingerprints. She navigated quickly, muscle memory guiding her through layers of documentation. The original model files were there, timestamps intact, version history clean. She opened one, scanning the metadata. Creation date, unchanged. Last modified, 2 days ago. By her. Her lips pressed together, not in anger but in calculation. 2 days ago, she had finalized the updated projections. Sent them for internal review. Limited distribution. Explicitly marked. She hadn't included him. The applause rose again, softer this time, like an echo trying to convince itself it was still relevant. Samantha closed the file and leaned back slightly, letting the edges of the situation sharpen. If he had access, it wasn't through her, which meant someone else had opened the door. Her eyes lifted from the screen and traced the room again. Not the stage this time, but the periphery. Analysts, managers, quiet observers pretending not to notice how narratives are constructed in real time. One of them looked away too quickly. There it was again, that flicker. Subtle, defensive. Samantha didn't react, not outwardly. Instead, she minimized the window and opened something else. Not the model, not yet. The logs. Access trails are rarely dramatic, they don't announce themselves. They whisper in timestamps and IP entries and sequences that only make sense when you stop expecting them to behave. She scrolled. There, a line that didn't belong. Timestamped late. Too late for routine work. The user ID wasn't hers, it wasn't his either, but it was someone close enough. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad for a fraction longer than necessary, because now the question had changed. It wasn't just who took the work, it was how quietly it had been handed over. Across the room, the CFO concluded his presentation with a confident nod, the kind that signals closure even when the story is just beginning. People began to shift, chairs moving, conversations blooming in low, satisfied tones. The slide faded, but the number, 18 all mirrors, lingered in the air like a promise someone had signed too quickly. Samantha closed her laptop with deliberate calm. No confrontation. Not here. Not now. Authority thrives in public, but truth prefers a quieter stage. And she knew exactly where to find it. Because the logs were only the beginning. And once you start reading them properly, they rarely stop talking. She took a step toward her desk, then paused. Something else had just updated. A notification, small and almost polite, appeared at the corner of her screen. File accessed. Again. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in surprise, but in confirmation. Someone was still inside. And this time, they weren't being careful. If you looked away now, you'd miss the exact moment the balance began to shift. The notification didn't disappear. It pulsed once, subtly, like a heartbeat you only notice when the room goes quiet. Samantha didn't click it immediately. That would be instinct. And instinct right now was exactly what someone else was counting on. Instead, she placed her laptop on the desk, aligned it with the edge as if preparing for something routine. Around her, the office had already moved on. Laughter near the coffee machine, someone retelling a highlight from the presentation, exaggerating the numbers just enough to make them sound inevitable. 18 million, a voice said behind her, almost reverently. Samantha exhaled slowly. Numbers don't lie, she thought, but people rearrange them until they forget what truth looked like. Only then did she open the notification. The file path was familiar. Too familiar. It led directly into her secured workspace, into a folder that had never been shared broadly. She clicked through, her movement steady, almost detached. There it was, her model, open, active, and being viewed under a session that didn't belong to her. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. Not dramatically, just enough to remind her that something foundational had shifted. This wasn't a one-time extraction. It was ongoing. Someone wasn't just using her work. They were still inside it. A faint chill traced its way down her spine, not from fear, but from clarity. Because clarity has its own temperature. It sharpens everything it touches. She didn't close the file. She watched. Lines scrolled slightly as if another cursor existed somewhere else, breathing through the same document. A parameter adjusted. A note highlighted. Careless or confident. Samantha's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Confidence leaves patterns, and patterns can be followed. She opened a secondary window, pulling up access logs in parallel. The timestamps aligned too neatly now. Entry, activity, adjustment, exit, and then repeat. Not random. Structured. Her fingers moved faster, tracing the digital footprints backward. Each access point connected to a node, each node to a user credential. Most of them were masked behind routine permissions, the kind no one questions because questioning slows things down. But one stood out. Not because it was obvious, because it was almost invisible. A shared credential, temporary, issued for cross-functional review. Her eyes lingered on the label for a second longer than necessary. Cross-functional. A phrase that sounds collaborative until you realize how easily it dissolves accountability. She leaned back slightly, letting the weight of the realization settle. Not as frustration, but as direction. This wasn't a theft in the dark. It was a transfer dressed as efficiency. Across the office, someone clinked a glass. Informal, celebratory. The CFO's voice followed, lighter now, relaxed in the afterglow of approval. Just the beginning, he said. Samantha closed her eyes for a brief moment. Yes, she thought. It was, but not in the way he meant. She reopened them and minimized the live session. Watching was useful, but it wasn't enough anymore. Not if the system itself had allowed this to happen. Because systems remember things people forget. And they record things people assume will stay hidden. She navigated deeper, not into her own files this time, but into the infrastructure that sat beneath them. Audit trails, version histories, submission records, layers most people never touch because they don't need to until they do. The interface changed, less polished, more technical. No soft colors, no reassuring dashboards, just raw entries, precise and indifferent. She began to pull threads. The original submission of her model, time-stamped weeks ago, authored by her, verified. Then the derivative report, the one presented today, time-stamped recently, authored by, she paused, not him. A different name, someone from finance, the same department that reported directly to him. Samantha's gaze sharpened. There it was, the bridge. Not a direct claim, but a constructed path. Her work flowing through an internal channel, reshaped just enough to appear newly owned by the time it reached the top. Clean, defensible, at least on the surface. Her fingers hovered again, then moved with quiet certainty. If the system had recorded the transformation, then it had also recorded the origin. And origins are difficult to dispute. She opened the export function, not the model itself, the metadata, the history, the sequence of changes that no presentation slide could rewrite. A small progress bar appeared, inching forward with calm indifference. Around her, the office noise swelled and dipped like a tide. Conversations layered over each other, none of them aware that something far more consequential was unfolding just a few desks away. Samantha watched the bar reach halfway, then 70%, then complete. The file sat there, unassuming. No dramatic label, no warning, just evidence. She didn't open it yet. Instead, she did something quieter. She uploaded it. Not to a shared drive, not to a team folder, to a place where entries triggered processes instead of the notifications. Legal review queue. The system didn't react immediately. It never did. That was the point. Quiet inputs, structured escalation, invisible until it wasn't. She closed the window and returned to her main screen, her expression unchanged. To anyone watching, she was just another employee catching up after a meeting. But beneath that stillness, something had already begun to move. Because once legal review starts, it doesn't ask for permission. And it doesn't move backward. Her phone buzzed softly. A new email. Subject line. Access verification request. Samantha glanced at it, then at the office beyond her screen. No one had noticed. Not yet. But the system had. And systems, unlike people, don't celebrate too early. If you think the 18 number is stable, you're looking at the wrong layer. If you've ever seen credit taken where it wasn't earned, tell me, what would you do in her place right now? The email didn't demand attention. It waited. That was the first thing Samantha noticed. No urgency markers, no red flags, no escalation tags screaming for response. Just a clean subject line. Access verification request. Sitting quietly in her inbox like a sealed envelope on a polished desk. She let it sit there a moment longer. Around her, the office had shifted into its late afternoon rhythm. The brightness of the morning's celebration had softened into something more diffuse. Conversations quieter, laughter less frequent, keyboards taking over where applause had left off. The kind of calm that often follows a decision people assume is final. Assume. Samantha clicked the email. A structured template opened. Precise. Neutral. Legal language softened just enough to sound procedural instead of significant. It referenced data access anomalies and routine verification processes, phrased in a way that suggested nothing unusual, unless you knew how rarely these messages were sent without cause. Her eyes scanned quickly. Timestamp correlation, user credential mapping, preliminary audit trigger. She leaned back slightly, letting the words settle into place. The system had accepted her upload. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to start asking questions. And questions once formalized have weight. Across the room, the CFO stood near the window, speaking with two senior managers. His posture hadn't changed. Still composed, still controlled, still inhabiting that effortless authority people rarely challenge directly. He gestured lightly as he spoke, the kind of gesture that signals ownership without needing to declare it. Samantha watched him for a second longer than necessary. Then she looked away. Because this wasn't about confrontation. Not yet. She returned to her screen and opened the verification request. There was a section for confirmation, routine acknowledgement that she had reviewed the access history connected to her files. Most people would skim it. Click, done, move on. Samantha didn't. Instead, she opened a parallel window and pulled up the same logs she had examined earlier. Side by side, they told slightly different stories, the polished summary in the email and the raw sequence beneath it. The difference wasn't obvious, but it was there. A missing entry. Small, almost insignificant. Except it wasn't. Her gaze fixed on the gap, the absence shaped like a question no one had asked yet. Because in systems like this, nothing simply disappears. It's either removed or never recorded in the first place. Both options had implications. She felt the shift again, that internal recalibration where emotion steps aside and something colder, sharper takes its place. Precision. Her fingers moved, tracing the timeline backward again, this time slower. Not looking for what stood out, but for what blended in too well. Entries aligned. Access points matched. Until they didn't. There. A fractional delay between two actions that should have been simultaneous. Milliseconds. Enough to be ignored. Unless you knew what it meant. A relay. An intermediary layer. Samantha's lips pressed into a thin line, not in frustration, but in recognition. This hadn't been a direct access at all. It had been routed. She minimized the logs and opened another system. One fewer people had reason to explore. Internal routing records. Not glamorous, not intuitive, but thorough in a way that bordered on obsessive. Because infrastructure doesn't assume innocence. It records behavior. The interface loaded slowly, as if reluctant to reveal anything quickly. Rows of entries appeared, dense and technical, each one a fragment of movement across the network. She filtered by timestamp, narrowed the window, and then, there it was, a transient session, brief, precise, and tied to a service account that wasn't meant to interact with proprietary models at all. Samantha's pulse didn't spike. It steadied, because now the pattern was complete. Not just who accessed her work, not just how it moved, but how it had been made to look legitimate. A quiet exhale left her lips, almost inaudible. Careful, she thought. Very careful, but not invisible. Across the office, someone called her name. She turned slightly, masking the screen with a practiced angle. Hey, Samantha, did you see the updated deck? They've already sent it to external reviewers. She nodded once, calm, neutral. I'll take a look, she replied. Her voice carried no edge, no accusation, nothing that would disrupt the surface. Because surfaces were still important. They kept people comfortable, and comfortable people rarely look beneath. The colleague smiled and moved on, unaware of how close the narrative had come to shifting. Samantha turned back to her screen. External reviewers. That meant distribution. And distribution meant timestamps. Which meant her eyes flicked back to the routing logs. If the report had been sent out, then the version history would be locked. Immutable. She opened the report archive, scrolled, found it. The same title, the same polished framing, the same 18 mailers impact, now packaged neatly for outside eyes. She hovered over the metadata. Creation chain, version lineage, authorship trace. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the data populated. Samantha's gaze sharpened, every detail snapping into focus. Because the origin point was still there, unchanged, unedited. Her name, not visible on the slide, not credited in the summary, but embedded where it couldn't be removed without breaking the structure itself. A quiet, almost imperceptible shift passed through her expression. Not triumph. Not yet, but something close to alignment. Because now the system didn't just suspect, it knew where to look. Her phone buzzed again. Another email, different sender. Internal audit. Samantha didn't open it immediately. She didn't need to. Some processes announce themselves with noise. Others arrive like a change in air pressure. Subtle, undeniable, impossible to reverse once noticed. She closed the archive and leaned back, letting the office come back into view. The CFO was still by the window, still speaking, still unaware. For now. Because somewhere between the logs, the routing layers, and the legal queue, something had already crossed a threshold. And once that line is crossed, numbers don't just get questioned, they get recalculated. By the time the second email arrived, the office had grown quieter in a way that didn't feel natural. Not silent, never silent, but tuned differently. Conversations dipped when certain names were mentioned. Laughter cut off half a second too early. Even the hum of the printers seemed more deliberate, as if every machine had suddenly remembered it was being watched. Samantha opened the message from internal audit. Unlike the first, this one didn't pretend to be routine. No soft language, no decorative phrasing, just structure. Preliminary review initiated. Data lineage under examination. Access pathways flagged for validation. Her eyes moved across the lines, absorbing each word not as information, but as movement. Because that's what this was now. A sequence unfolding step by step, independent of anyone's comfort, independent of authority. She glanced up. The CFO had returned to his office. The glass walls reflected the room back at itself, turning him into a silhouette behind layers of transparency. A figure both visible and unreachable, until processes made him neither. Samantha lowered her gaze again. The audit wasn't asking her for anything yet. That was significant. It meant they already had enough to proceed. She scrolled further. External distribution freeze under consideration. There it was. Not applied yet, not announced, but present as a possibility. A quiet tightening in her chest, quickly replaced by something steadier. Timing. Everything depended on timing now, because once a freeze was enacted, questions would follow. Formal ones, documented ones. The kind that require answers, not narratives. And narratives, she knew, had already been carefully arranged. Across the room, a notification chimed, louder than usual. Heads turned. Someone checked their screen, frowned slightly, then looked toward a colleague as if silently asking, "Did you get that too?" Samantha didn't move, but she listened. A second chime, then a third, like distant signals aligning. She opened her system dashboard. A small banner had appeared at the top, neutral gray, almost easy to miss. Review mode enabled for selected financial documents. Selected. Not all. Just enough. Her eyes flicked to the report archive again. The 18-number file now carried a subtle marker beside it. No explanation, no detail. Just a symbol that meant one thing internally, locked for observation. She exhaled slowly. It had started. Not loudly, not publicly, but undeniably. She leaned forward, resting her elbows lightly on the desk, fingers interlaced. From the outside, it looked like focus. Routine concentration. The kind managers appreciate. Inside, everything was aligning with quiet precision. Because once a document enters review mode, every interaction with it is recorded at a different level. Not just access, but intent, duration, sequence. People rarely adjust their behavior fast enough. They continue as they were, and that's when the system learns the most. A soft knock echoed from the CFO's office door. Someone stepped inside. Finance, by the look of it. The door closed gently behind them, sealing the conversation from view but not from consequence. Samantha's gaze lingered there for a moment, then shifted back. Her inbox refreshed. Another message. Short. Please confirm availability for follow-up clarification if required. No urgency, no pressure. Just inevitability wrapped in politeness. She didn't reply yet. Instead, she opened the routing logs again, watched, waited. Because if the document was now under review, then any new interaction would stand out. Seconds passed. Then, an entry. The same transient pathway. The same service account. Trying to access the report. But this time, the response was different. Denied. Samantha's lips parted slightly, not in surprise, but in confirmation. Someone had just reached for the file and found it no longer within easy reach. Across the office, the CFO's door opened. The person who had entered stepped out, their expression composed but tighter than before. They didn't look around, didn't speak. just walked quickly back to their desk, movements precise, contained. Too contained. Samantha watched them sit down, open their laptop, pause, then type. Fast, too fast. She turned back to her screen. Another entry appeared in the logs. A second attempt. Different route. Also denied. The system wasn't just observing anymore, it was closing doors. A faint shift passed through the room again. Subtle but spreading. Conversations thinning. Eyes drifting toward screens more often than toward each other. Because something had changed. Not visibly, but structurally. Samantha leaned back, letting the chair support her as she looked once more toward the glass office. The CFO stood still now. No gestures, no relaxed posture, just stillness. As if listening to something no one else could hear yet. Her phone vibrated. A new email. Subject line. Review escalation. Financial impact reassessment. Samantha didn't open it. Not immediately. She didn't need to. Because somewhere between the denied access attempts, the locked document, and the silent processes now fully in motion, the 18-ometer number had stopped being a result and started becoming a question. The email opened without ceremony. No dramatic formatting, no bold warnings, just a structured document, clean and precise, like everything that carries real consequence. Financial impact reassessment initiated. Samantha's eyes moved line by line, each sentence tightening the frame around what had once been presented as certainty. Language had shifted, carefully, deliberately. Preliminary valuation subject to verification. Source model lineage under audit. Reported impact pending adjustment. Pending adjustment. She leaned back slightly, letting the phrase settle. Numbers don't disappear all at once. They erode, quietly, formally, one revision at a time until what once felt solid becomes conditional. Across the office, no one said it out loud yet, but something in the air had changed direction. Conversations no longer circled around success. They hovered around uncertainty, like people testing the floor before committing their weight. Samantha closed the email and opened the report again. The same polished document, the same confident structure. But now, a new layer had appeared. A subtle annotation panel on the side, gray, minimal, almost apologetic in its presence. Review Note 1. Source attribution inconsistency detected. Review Note 2. Data pathway requires validation. Review Note 3. Impact figure under recalculation. She didn't react. She observed. Because this was the moment where perception begins to separate from reality. And most people don't notice until the gap becomes impossible to ignore. A shadow moved across the glass wall. The CFO stepped out of his office. This time there was no audience waiting. No cluster of approving nods. Just a few scattered glances that lingered a fraction too long before returning to their screens. Authority, Samantha thought, doesn't vanish. It thins. He walked across the floor with measured calm, stopping briefly to speak to someone in finance. His posture remained composed, but something subtle had shifted. The ease was gone, replaced by precision. Every movement now looked considered, accounted for. She turned back to her screen. Another notification. Internal audit had updated the case. She opened it. Escalation confirmed. Independent review engaged. External auditors granted limited access. There it was, the threshold. Once external auditors enter a system, the narrative stops being internal. It stops being adjustable. It becomes a record. Permanent. Samantha exhaled slowly. Not relief, not satisfaction, just alignment with what had already been set in motion. Her fingers rested lightly on the keyboard, not typing, not intervening, because there was nothing left to push. The system was moving on its own now. Across the room, a quiet ripple passed, one of those subtle shifts that spreads without announcement. Someone refreshed a dashboard. Someone else frowned. A manager stood up, then sat back down again as if reconsidering whether movement itself might draw attention. The report refreshed automatically on Samantha's screen. She didn't touch anything. She watched. The 18-hour Milo figure remained for a second longer than expected, almost stubborn in its presence. Then it changed. Not dramatically. No flashing alerts. No sudden drop. Just a recalculation. $18,000. $0 for a moment, the screen looked incomplete, as if waiting for the number to correct itself. It didn't. A new line appeared beneath it. Impact withdrawn pending verified attribution. Samantha's gaze didn't waver, because this was the quietest part of the entire process, the moment where everything visible adjusts to match what was always true underneath. No applause, no confrontation, just correction. Across the office, someone finally spoke. Wait, wasn't it? The sentence didn't finish. It didn't need to. Heads turned, but not toward her. Toward the screens. Toward the number that was no longer there. The CFO stood still again, just for a second. Then he moved. Not quickly, not urgently, but with the kind of control that suggests awareness, not of what's happening, but of what it means. Samantha closed the report. Her reflection appeared faintly on the darkened screen, steady, composed. Nothing about her expression claimed victory, because this wasn't that kind of story. There had been no public correction, no announcement tying her name to the work, no immediate recognition. Just something quieter. Ownership restored where it couldn't be erased. She opened one last window, the original model. Her model. Untouched, unaltered. Still carrying her name in every place that mattered. The office continued around her, adjusting, recalibrating, searching for a new version of the story that made sense. But systems don't search. They conclude. And somewhere between the first silent upload and this final recalculation, the truth hadn't risen. It had simply remained, waiting for everything else to catch up.